I'm Erica Lynn, and we all know the ocean is the most demanding environment on Earth, consistently testing the reliability and durability of our equipment. When you spend as much time fishing as I do, you know that reliable gear is essential for staying on the water. This is why I went with the Abyss battery to power my trolling motor, electronics, and outboard. The guys at Abyss Battery are rattling the saltwater industry by manufacturing performance marine batteries specifically designed for sonar, outboards, trolling motors, and electronic fishing reels. They're also Bluetooth compatible, so I found checking battery statuses right on your phone while you're out on the water is a huge game changer. To learn more about why Abyss batteries are used by the pros and factory installed by premier boat builders, visit abyssbattery.com.
Hello and welcome to the Publicly Challenged Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Oswald, and I hope you join me on my quest for knowledge to become a better public land hunter, angler, and forager. Stick with this and who knows, maybe we will learn something together. All right, real quick before we get started on the show, I'm just going to talk about Treeline Academy. You've heard me say it. I can't even tell you how many times. Mark Livesay is treelineacademy.net. That's treelineacademy.net. Sign up. Use the promo code PC2020. Save yourself $20. Can't say it enough. It's awesome. Amazing. Most comprehensive e-scouting course out there. Check it out for yourself. Sign up. Use promo code PC2020. And now let's get to the show.
All right, I am sitting here and I am talking to Mike O'Brien. And Mike, would you go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody listening?
I'm Mike O'Brien. I'm a full-time fly fishing guide in northern Utah. I've been a full-time guide for now 5 years. Been fly fishing for over 30.
30 years.
And that's, yeah.
So, born and raised Utah, transplant?
I was born in Utah, spent probably the first 4 or 5 years of my life out here, and then moved and pretty much raised in and around Portland, Oregon, and moved back here about 10, almost 11 years ago now.
So still some good fly fishing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter, I tell people it's a matter of scale, right? If you're used to chasing, salmon and steelhead, Utah does not have that, right? We've got great trout. Some guys chase carp with a fly rod. We have a little bit of bass. Some lake trout in the fall you can potentially hook up with on a fly rod as well. But most part, our bread and butter are beautiful trout. And we've got, some nice species out here too.
So let's I'm kind of curious, how did your whole fly fishing career start? Like, did you just pick it up at a young age from time you were a little boy? What were you doing? Were you hitting trout streams?
I grew up, my uncle would always take me fishing. Like his Christmas present to me every year would be a couple 2 to 4 fishing trips up in the mountains in Oregon with him. And then it started just as, spinning, chucking worms and eggs and spinners. And then when I was a teen, when I was, I guess, 16, 17, we went up to a river called the John Day River in Oregon and floated it for 2 days, and just started hammering bass with 7 weights, and I was hooked. And so then from then on, Oregon has bass and a lot of salmon and steelhead, as well as trout, both sea run, cutthroat, and rainbow and browns, and so I got the bug because it's so fun.
That's pretty cool. So when you hook into like some of those like sea run salmon, what
yes,
how big of a rod? What are you using? I mean, that's got to be some seriously heavy tackle.
8 to 10 weights. So I think for steelhead, the lightest I've gone is an 8 weight usually, because they're sea run rainbow trout, and they're the smallest of those fish typically. You can hook into like a monster sometimes, but you're typically looking between 7 to 13 pounds on a steelhead, and they can put you into backing in 2 to 3 seconds. on strong drag. And then you've got coho, which are silver salmon, right? Coho salmon. And they can be about the same in terms of weight, maybe a little bit heavier, but they will run. And you need a 9 or a 10 weight for silvers, and for Chinook king salmon. If you don't have a 9 or a 10 weight, you're gonna get busted off or spooled, and then breaking a rod. So yeah.
So when you're pulling them in or reeling them in, are you just stripping line back as you're doing it? You're not trying to reel them, are you?
Oh, you can't strip them. No, you can't strip them in. No, you have to reel them, because if they decide, because you're in rivers with good heavy current that such that if you stand in knee-deep water, it's hard for you to keep standing up. Okay. So these coastal rivers are ripping current. And so if they decide, screw you, I'm going to turn down river and run, if you tried to strip them in, your hands you'd be blown up with line burn, or you'd get that caught around your reel or around your rod, and then your rod's blowing up, right? Because that friction, there's not enough time. So when I was a kid, drag on reels wasn't heavy enough to slow them down enough, so we learned to palm the reel. And so if you had one with a decent amount of drag, but a big fish would take it, you would still have to palm that reel a little bit to slow them down until they turned back, and then you could begin fighting them in. A lot of times, like in a river and through it, you're running down 50 to 100 yards of riverbank until they kind of decide, I'm done running. You're just hanging on for dear life at that point.
That's awesome,
right? Yeah,
it's a riot, man. Like a serious rush, especially if you're new to that. Like I feel like if you were new to that, and that was your first experience fly fishing, you would have lack of appreciation for other things.
Yeah, no, there's a reason why. I mean, I'm outside. I was we did my little bio too. I was thinking I'm outside probably 300 days plus a year. I can fish every day of the year here in Utah, and I can fish all over the world, right? And I don't make a ton of money. If I were to try and hunt 300 days a year plus, you have to have an obscene amount of money to be able to support that habit. Right? I mean, it's just not quite the same. So the adrenaline rush, I mean, even when I have a 17, 18-inch trout on a 4-weight rod, and he's ripping line, it's a rush. That it taps into something primal within us that is just, you don't experience it living in a city, right? You don't experience it in daily life. You don't experience it unless you're outside in nature, truly, fighting with a wild animal, which is what it is. It's exhilarating.
Yeah. I don't understand the people that only hunt or the people that don't, or only fish. Like, to me, it's an all-inclusive, immersive experience that, like, if you don't tap into one or the other, you're missing out on part of, like, a primal connection. Like you're saying, like, you're missing out on the full experience of the outdoors. And it's just crazy.
And a part of it is, I think what our society over the last couple decades has lost is, or over the last couple generations, are outdoorsmen, right? Like, I'll take people out on the river. I'm like, this is cut by beaver. Oh, look, there's a mink. They're like, that's a beaver. No, that's a muskrat. These are, like, close. It's a rodent, right? Just a third of the size, right? These are not the same things. But people don't understand, like, hey, what's that track? Oh, that's a raccoon. That's mink, right? These are things that you and I just have learned over years and don't take for granted. Like I appreciate it every day. I get to look at these mountains every day, and my office, you can't beat it, right? It's spectacular. It's humbling. And when the weather is just, when Mother Nature decides to turn it up a notch, it's still spectacular. You just have to be prepared.
Yeah. That's, you know, and it even goes deeper than that, like you were saying, with just like the outdoorsman thing, is a lot of people, skills that we just take for common sense these days because of the amount of time that we probably spent outside or done things. It's lacking. It's missing. It's not something that's there anymore for a lot of people, and we take it for granted that, you know, people have the same knowledge, and that can get you into trouble sometimes.
Oh yeah,
you know.
Absolutely. I 4 years ago, I hiked the Narrows in Zion's National Park, which is a pretty famous like slot canyon, and a river, the Virgin River, runs right through the middle of it, and it's spectacular. And I had a friend who drew the permit because it's lottery based. We went in the second week in November, and it's in southern Utah. The high that day maybe was 50 degrees, but we're 300 feet down this canyon, and we saw the sun on our backs for 10 minutes that day. And I didn't realize how unprepared the people in the party were until two gals, one of them my 18-year-old niece and the other my buddy's wife, went in over their heads after dark. And then I was like, okay, where's your extra clothes? No, I'm wearing every stitch I've got. Okay, well, what have you eaten today? I haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. Okay, well, your water bladder is full. What have you drunk? Well, I haven't had a sip. Okay, we got a problem, right? Then it goes from a crazy fun experience to one like we're on the clock. We still have 3.5 hours to go before we get to the parking lot with no satellite reception, no cell service, right? And there's only one way out. So it gets common sense is, I think now, ought to be a misnomer, right? This is just because it's not common anymore. People don't think about these things. As a result of that trip, like I take clients, one of the really fun things that I do is I take them over 10,000 feet in elevation for 4 days, and we backpack and fly fish remote lakes and streams in the summer. But I have a full gear list of bare minimums that they have to hit. And if they don't invest in that, that's fine. You're just not going on the trip, because I'm not gonna. I've got full trauma kits, you know, from Fieldcraft with me. Like I've got a Garmin InReach, right? I'm prepared for everything except for your unpreparedness and stupidity, right? And if you make a bad mistake, that's okay. We can make contingencies, and we can get you to safety and to help. But if you just decide, oh no, I'll bring a blanket instead of a sleeping bag, or this tent, you know, is fine, or if you cut corners, Mother Nature doesn't care, right? It's and Darwin, I think, is all too lacking in our society. You know, we need a little more Darwinism.
I think, modern conveniences have made it easier for people to definitely survive.
Beyond, what they would have a century ago, right?
Hey Siri, how do I stay alive right now?
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry, you don't have an internet connection. Yeah. Oh no. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Roll up and die.
So what kind of fishing are you primarily doing every day on the rivers right there in Utah then?
So we do fly fishing. I do fly fishing almost exclusively. I would say over 99% of it's fly fishing. Most of the most successful technique would be nymphing. That I would probably say I do at least 90% of the time. And nymphing is taking the bugs that the fish are regularly eating subsurface to right where they're hanging out, which is normally right on the bottom of the riverbeds. And that we have a few different methods for, getting there, but it's a highly successful technique. When fish are looking up, then, I grab a couple dry rods and we'll fish on the top. When it's when they're pre-spawn, or when the fish begin spawning, we will probably start throwing streamers and maybe some egg patterns too, to get some pretty aggressive bucks or hens to play with us.
So what do the egg patterns look like? I've never actually seen that technique.
Mm.
I'm from the Midwest, so it's a little
Yeah.
bit different here.
So so they're little. You tie on a little bit of colored yarn, like neon or kind of pastel yarn, and typically it'll be a little bit lighter shade and then a touch darker shade just in the center, so it looks like it's been a just fertilized egg or an egg with an embryo in it. If they're spawning and they're on the reds, which is their spawning beds, a lot of times we'll cast just below or to the side of those, and those will trigger an aggressive response because they don't want other eggs to be successful. And so it's just typically a little bit of yarn that looks like an egg. And it's fun. I mean, they get mad.
Interesting. So
yeah.
Does the egg actually, it's not a floating egg, it's like subsurface or
subsurface. So we put it on, so we use a rig, a kind of a system called the Provo bounce rig. And so at the bottom are some weights to get the flies down. And then off the main line, we tie a couple tags with flies. And then we usually will run an indicator up top. And the indicator is what pulls downriver the weights and the flies. And then the weights act as ballast or to slow it down. So one thing that a lot of people don't understand, because they're not out in nature, is that the most heavy current from a river is right on the top. That's where the river current is pushing the fastest. Where it's pushing the least is at the very bottom, right? So if you have something that is, let's say, the top of the river is running at 5 knots, okay? The bottom of the river might be only running at 2 or 2.25. And so you need to pace it so that it's not screaming by like a motorcycle going down the highway at 110, right? You want it to be going with the flow of traffic and the flow of everything else, so it looks natural. When it's natural, that's when you get, a typical feeding response, and they take it and typically hook right in the corner of their mouth or right in the nose, and we get to play them, and most of the time we let them go.
Nice. That reminds me of that meme or like the GIF or whatever on social media that you see lately. It's talking about how the fly fishermen, and wait a minute, so you guys catch all these fish and you just let them go all day long? Like
all day long.
Yeah.
I will say, so the Provo River, I was part of our DNR study last fall on the counting of the fish, and right now we have over 5,000 fish per mile, and they consider a catchable fish or a fish that we counted as being 6 inches and over. So typically a healthy river has 3, maybe 4,000. 5,000 is absurd. So
you almost need people to
they're encouraging us to, if clients are wanting to, like, I will absolutely bonk and gut fish for clients to have them take out on the river, because we just have so many now that that it's stunting our big fish from growing even bigger with all the competition.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to do that. When we go up into the high lakes, we're absolutely eating, what we catch. And a lot of time those are brook trout. Sometimes they're cutthroat. Sometimes they're grayling.
So are those pretty much native, or do you think some of those at some point have been stocked?
So we have native cutthroat trout in Utah, of 2 different varieties, Bonneville, Yellowstone. I guess in Colorado, in eastern Utah. The brown trout, the rainbow trout, the grayling, the brook trout, those have all been planted over the last 150 years. So browns were the first trout to get implanted here, and while they're not a true native, they're regulated, just like the rainbows. So you can keep fish under 15 inches on most of the rivers that I fish on with clients. But anything over that, you grip and grin and let them go.
Yeah. So what's the rules of thumb as far as, you want to keep your hands wet, right? Keep them low in the water to keep them.
Yes.
I know they're a lot more sensitive.
Oxygenated.
Yeah, they're a lot more sensitive than our smallmouth or largemouth. You could sit them, take them, hold them by the lip, flip them into the water. It doesn't matter.
No. So they are a little more delicate. They're sensitive to temperature. Right now is the warmest time of year for their water temps. But wet hands is imperative. You also don't want to trap or put pressure on their gill plate. That flexing of the gill plate helps them stay calm, but it also keeps their gills not damaged, right? I mean, you don't want to damage the gills at all, and you don't want to squeeze the crap out of them. So you just kind of cradle them when you lift them up. What a lot of people don't do from the videos that I watch is they don't turn the fish upriver, number one, right? Because that's how they breathe, water through the mouth over the gills. And a lot of times you'll see them push the fish and then pull them back, right? Pulling them doesn't help them breathe. If you hold them in that current near the top of the water, where we just discussed is the fastest, current, that will help break down that lactic acid they built up in the fight and help them recover faster. And they're able to swim off with much lower mortality. Now, if it's warmer, or if it was an absolute monster and it took a long time, it might take you a while to get them revived to where they want to swim off on their own. What you don't want to do is you don't want to just set them in the water and let them go, because if they're too warm or if they're too exhausted, odds are they'll die.
So,
right?
They'll just end up hitting a bunch of rocks or whatever, and
they'll just turn upside down and float down the river, and it's game over, because they just haven't had enough time to recover and break down all the stress and lactic acid you put in their body on the fight. So a lot of times, if you hold them there, sometimes it could take a couple minutes, but rotating them a little bit side to side gently will help them to realize, oh wait, I'm not swimming here. This isn't me. And they'll take off and then find a nice big rock to kind of sit behind and kind of lick their wounds.
Interesting. So, okay.
Yeah.
Now that we've covered that, say you're keeping it, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you doing, are you gilling it? Are you cutting, bleeding it?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
So growing up in Oregon and fishing a lot of ocean, any fish, I'll cut their gills. So I bonk them on the noggin, right? So that when you rotate them on their side, that eye goes straight up and it isn't aspect down to let you know they're knocked out. That way, when you cut their gills kind of at that apex at the bottom of the U, right? They're not thrashing. And I'll put them on a little willow stringer like I did when I was a kid. And then once they've bled out, then I go back through, I cut out their gills and remove all the guts and the fish here. So one big misnomer with trout is that brown trout taste gross. They taste amazing. A lot of times that meat is like orangish, almost like a light salmon or like a char, like a brook trout almost. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful meat. And a lot of it depends on what they've been eating. But trout don't live in ugly places, right? They need clean, clear water. They need cold temps to survive. And they taste great. So, just like with any fish, the worst thing you can do is overcook them, right? But they taste great. So I always gill them. I always cut the gills, and then let them bleed out, and toss the guts and gills back into the river and take them home.
So when you take them home, what's the next step? Where we going from there? Are you doing anything
So
special before the freezer?
it depends. Sometimes, so typically I don't freeze. I don't need to freeze trout.
Right.
Because I mean, every month of the year, any day of the week, I can go out and be successful. I would say if you do end up freezing them, you might want to put them in like a light salt bath for 10 to 15 minutes. That will help that meat to stay a little more moist when you slack them out, when you thaw them, and it also helps to protect that meat from the freezer. So, but when I do it, sometimes I'll smoke them. So I'll put them in a salt bath for half an hour maybe before I smoke them, or I just throw them on the grill or the skillet with some butter and lemon and a little bit of oil, some seasoned salt. I like trout really simple.
Yeah, no, that sounds delicious. We used to catch rainbows. There was a place that used to actually stock them. So I mean, they were farm raised, but
Sure.
my buddy and I would go there, and I can't remember what it was the guy would charge, but he was stocking 3-pounders and 4-pounders. That's how he was buying them and stocking them. They were big trout. So we would go and we'd catch these pond trout. It was a small lake really, but we called it ponds. And I think he had a limit of like 3, but I think he paid like $10 for the day. So
oh wow.
The guy was like, when we would go and limit out, and then they were finicky, but we'd work at it a little bit, figure out what they were eating. Sometimes maybe even put some like cat food or dog food on a hook and catch them because they were used to feeders, and we would limit out. And so we'd limit out on these fish, and the guy was absolutely losing money because he'd even clean them for us before we left.
Oh, wow.
So 3 fish in an hour, paid our $10 each or whatever it was. And we'd take them and go smoke them. And we'd, just lay like a slice of lemon real thin, lay them on the smoker, some salt, and smoke them. And, man, other than the bones, they were delicious. But, do you ever do anything to try and take, like, I've heard if you take a real sharp chef knife, you can actually slice, if you lay it flat open with your 2 halves of the fish, if you slice down the spinal column perfectly.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by overpriced wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I heard that for a limited time, all Mint Mobile wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they sell wireless service online. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
That you can actually pull out almost the entire set of bones on them.
All the pin bones.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can?
That's absolutely true.
Okay. I've never done that. I've always picked around them.
So the pin bones on a big trout, let's say he's 18 inches, okay, an 18-inch trout, a nice trout, bigger than skillet size. He may only have pin bones that come out maybe 2 or 3 inches down from his collar. So otherwise they won't pull off unless you're filleting them, right? A lot of my clients from the South, they'll fillet like 6-8 inch trout and like leave the skin on, but they'll fillet them. I'm like, they're like, well, we fillet everything. Like we fillet crappie, we fillet 8-inch trout. It's fine. Like, well, okay, that's, I guess, one way to do it, right? But then you got to grab your little tweezers and pick out all those silly bones.
Yeah.
I don't, unless it's, honestly, if I were to catch fish, I'm trying to think if there's any I guess if I'm ocean fishing, I'll fillet like rockfish. But otherwise, I mean, most of the prep on freshwater fish is all like whole fish prep types scenarios, right? And then once they're cooked, you can take them off the bone super easily because it just peels right off when they're just right.
Nice. I didn't think about that like that. That's kind of a good way to do it. Yeah. I mean, around here, any of our fish, you kind of fillet them out too, mostly panfish and something. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Those sunfish.
Yeah.
Right. Those warm water. Yeah.
Except for those, like my dad's been doing it lately to where scale them, scale them, cut the head off, cut the tail off, and pretty much cook them whole like that. And it works pretty good too. Then they just pull right off the bones. Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, you end up getting a few, you know.
Yeah. No, it's great. And, you know, I think it builds character, right? Just like with, you know, waterfowling, you're going to end up biting into some shot one, you know, here and there. That's just
I try to avoid that.
Part of the program, right?
Well, now
everyone tries to, but I mean, I'll run duck, you know, through my grinder, and I'll get little like 6-shot or something on teal or maybe even a mallard. Like, how did this little tiny pellet get in here? And it makes its way through my plates, and I end up biting into, you know, a finished sausage. I'm like, who put this in there?
So
right?
With that being said, a lot of people are switching to like tungsten and different things. And, you know, at least with lead, you bite into it and it's not going to break a tooth.
Soft. Yeah.
You bite, and I've bitten into a lead pellet and you spit it out. But like, can you imagine biting into a piece of tungsten or something like that?
No.
Oh my goodness.
No, that's, well, not only biting into it, but I mean, if I shot and missed a bird with a tungsten shell, I'd be like, well, there goes $5.
Well,
right. It's not like I'm shooting an elk, right? Where I'm like, okay, that $2.5, $3 per round is justifiable, right? When you're shooting tungsten at birds, dude, you're going, you know, you're going through a lot of shells.
That's I mean, some states require it now.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh man.
So like,
I had no idea.
It's leadless. It's
right
for when you're doing birds, and I think even so, like Illinois, I believe it either has to be copper plated lead for doves, because you were talking about doves just before we jumped on. I believe for doves it either has to be non-lead, so it's either tungsten or copper plated. And I don't even know if they'll allow copper plated lead anymore. It might actually have to be like tungsten or something like that. Yeah.
Or bismuth.
Bismuth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least for doves. And can you imagine that though? Because doves, how many shells? Imagine how many shells.
Oh.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to let me go out with a 410, which is kind of crazy anyway, because now it's like trying to shoot a duck with a BB gun. You know, it's the same concept. Single shot.
Totally.
And I'm over there just break barrel. Boom, boom, left and right with a 410 shotgun. And I'd go through 4 boxes of 410. Well, back then it was cheap and you reloaded yourself. Can you imagine doing that?
Sure.
doing that
no,
now?
Dude.
And with tungsten on top of it.
No, that's mental. That's mental.
Yeah.
I tie flies with tungsten beads, and every time I have to place a big order, I'm like, "Are you kidding me? This is crazy. There's no. It shouldn't cost this much. It's not. You know,
not gold.
Yeah, it's not gold. I'm not making jewelry over here, right? These are fish are going to eat these. I'm shooting this at birds, and it costs me how much? You know.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I don't get it.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, like some more techniques. Like you talked a little bit about using the what'd you call the method with the
Provo bounce rig nymphing?
Yeah, nymphing.
Yeah.
So what else? I mean, like different times of year, you said you use streamers and stuff like that. Is that now like later in the year you use the streamers?
Yeah.
Like
so as the water temps cool down, so fish are very opportunistic. Number one. Number two, they have FOMO more than people do, right? Fear of missing out. And so if they see a big opportunity that looks realistic, they need to capitalize on it, because number three is they have a real big scarcity mentality, and they don't know when their next meal is coming, even though they're basically on a conveyor belt of bugs, right? As the water gets colder, there's less bugs in the water moving, and their metabolism slows down too. This triggers a need to build up stores to make it through the winter. So as the water temps cool, as the hours of the day get shorter, it triggers a real need and fear that they have to feed. And so ripping streamers in the fall, casting them out and having them come right in front of their face, you can have fish like aggressively chase a fly 15 to 30 plus feet as it's coming by them before they hammer it. It's really fun. Or you might have them kind of nip at it a little bit and just get the very like last half inch where there's no hook. And so you just keep strip, and you feel these little nips, and then you'll feel a monster take when they commit because it's pissing them off that they're not quite getting it. And so they'll speed up and just hammer it. Those are probably the most aggressive strikes when you're fly fishing for trout. When you're fly fishing for anything, really. I mean, you could, whether it's salmon or in the saltwater, redfish or bonefish or permit, most of those that triggers that predatorial response that they want to chase and that they have to eat it whole, because it's not like they've got time to take bites, right? So they eat the whole thing in one gulp.
Nice. So when you're using those streamers, is it like a neutral buoyancy streamer? It's kind of like just kind of under the surface going by, at a certain depth. Are you setting depth somehow, or are you?
So that's a great question. So when I'm running streamers, I typically run them with two different rods, and I'll have one rod with a sink tip, a heavy sink tip line to go through deep runs, deep holes, or like at the top of a run into a hole so that it drops down and we can strip it across. That is very successful. When I have the heavy sink line, the streamer is unweighted. Okay. The other way that I'll do it is I will run a floating line, and then I will have a very heavy streamer. So the difference is when I'm stripping the weighted line, the sinking line, and I strip it, the streamer comes along at the same depth in the water. He doesn't continue to sink. Even if I'm stripping across current, that line stays down when I begin stripping. It stays at that same depth. So it looks like this fish is just trying to get away, which is more naturally how they will respond when a little bait fish is getting chased. They'll try and run either at the bottom of the river or at that same height in the water column to escape the predator. The other option you have is using that floating line on more shallow beds or flats with a weighted streamer that gets down so that when you strip it, it comes up and then drops back down and looks like not as natural, but like, oh, there's something wrong with this fish. It may be injured, it may be dying, or it's just acting off, right? And Darwinism in the water is just as strong as it is, in the rest of Mother Nature. Yeah. And so they see something weak and they take it out of the gene pool. Yeah. So you kind of want, when you're working a river, most of the rivers, well, all the rivers here are tailwaters, meaning they are fed from a dam. So no big rivers here are free flowing because we're in the second driest state in the US, and precip is we pray for water like every day of the year. We don't have enough, and with more people moving in, we always seem to be in a drought because there's a higher demand than ever before. So all these are fed from dams, and so we have to hit these different riffles with flats and then these deep runs with deep holes. And so you don't need two rigs, but if you really want to be successful with that technique, having two separate rods for that purpose is really helpful.
Yeah. So your second technique, the one with the floating line with the weighted minnow,
Yeah.
so you get
Yeah.
that flicker that makes it look like either an injured bait fish or something's wrong with it. That's
Yeah.
typically the technique that I actually use for fishing for smallmouth in the rivers
Yeah.
and creeks around here. And
Yeah.
it triggers that predatory response. It's like, oh, I'm going to take that one out. Something's
You
wrong
don't
with it.
belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And it works pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's either Klausers or like a Merdich that we use.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah,
works pretty good. And what I
Yeah,
find
that's
weird though
awesome.
is like, especially even if the water is milky from like
Yeah.
a heavy rain and it's moving faster, some
Yes.
reason white just really triggers that response. I don't know if it's because it
Yes.
looks so similar to a bait fish or something like that.
Yes.
But
Well, and it also, the contrast too, I think, is a big part of it, right? So their lateral lines pick up movement in the water, and they have way better vision than I understand. But that contrast is something that that they're like, oh, maybe they see the shadow off of the white, or maybe they just see a little bit more of that extra movement, right? If the water's chocolate milk and you throw something brown, good luck,
yeah.
right?
But even in clear
Unless it's
water,
got
that's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
was going to say
yeah.
is even in clear water, that white just seems to outperform anything else. It's crazy.
Yeah, and some of it's species specific. I know here in Utah, white can be really effective. On super sunny days, darker is way better. And you don't want a whole lot of flesh. You want it dark. You know, we have a lot of sculpin in these waters, and these little sculpin, there's nothing sexy or attractive, or they're these little, they're ugly, and they're dark, and they're brown, and like dark brown and dark green. But every year I'll find a couple trout who have died because they've tried to eat a sculpin that's too big for their mouth. and their spines get stuck, because they're super spiny little fish, right? And their spines will get stuck in their mouth, or the spines off those pectoral fins, and it gets lodged, and they can't regurgitate them, which is their only defense mechanism against overeating, and they end up dying.
That's crazy. I've never seen a smallmouth or a largemouth die from that.
Yeah, no, those bucket mouths, man, those are huge. Yeah,
I've seen them eat a baby duck before.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
But yeah, so if somebody's coming out to Utah and they want to go fly fishing, like what would your advice to them be?
Yeah, so if you have a good familiarity with fly fishing, I would say call a fly shop. Spend a few dollars on some flies, and get their input. The best fly shop in the US is 15 minutes from my house. And I don't say that's not hyperbolic. The shop is Fly Fish Food. The US competitive fly fishing team captain is actually at that shop. These guys have dozens, if not hundreds, of flies each to their name that are marketed under their names. And they know what's going on. They're awesome. If not, if you don't bring your own gear, then hire a guide, and be specific with the type of experience you would like to have. If you're looking to just have fun, awesome. If you want to learn, great. If you want to get away from people, that's going to be a different experience than, someone who says, hey man, I just want to have some fun. I want to relax and get out on the water for 4 hours. Great. We can do that too. Right.
Yeah.
But, try and be a little specific with the type of experience you would like to have. And if you have zero experience, then expectations are low, right? You want to know if this is a passion, or if it's a hobby you'd like to pick up. I love to take beginners, because I can begin building a foundation of skills that could take you from, fly fishing in Belize to Alaska. So it doesn't really matter what your experience level is, as long as you're just willing to listen. Yeah, it's fun. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, when you're looking for, like, I understand that when you're in your own home territory, you obviously know all the spots, the currents, the ripples, the pools, all that kind of stuff. Say you're going somewhere else. What are you looking for? One that's going to hold the fish, or different types of terrain. I've got a buddy that says that he can actually e-scout and find some pretty good spots on the river to fly fish. So what are you looking for? What are you doing?
So it depends on time of year. So we went up to Alaska. We spent a week and a half in Alaska in May. And I fished a couple rivers before they all got blown out because it was too hot. But what I look for is consistency. I want, if there's a good run, and it could be anywhere from 18 inches to 18 feet deep, but I want a little bit of consistency. I like some structure in the river. So being able to see some boulders or some eddies where fish might congregate. If it's a smaller river, seeing foam lines where food will vector and get pushed is a great indicator of feeding lanes for fish. And then I like to spend a little bit of time kind of surveying. This sounds nerdy, but checking out like the bugs in the river. And so I'll turn over rocks. I have a little it's a painting like mesh like little mitt that I will like kick up rocks above me and then have that in the water below, and then look up and see what's on that mesh and is trapping what kind of bugs, so that I know how to target them. And then the most fun thing is to just sit there 5, 10, 20 minutes and see if you see fish activity, whether in the water or on top of the water, to begin, developing a plan. And then figuring out, okay, if they're eating on the top, then that's a no-brainer. We're going to go dry flies, right? And let's see if we can watch them take the fly, which is exhilarating, right? If you haven't done that before, you talk about anticipation, right? Seeing the fish coming up and taking all these bugs, and then you cast one right in that lane and waiting for that. And then once they take it, waiting for them to get the hook deep enough and turn their bodies back down before you set. I hold my breath, now when I do it, right? I'm like, come on. I mean, it's so fun. So it just depends. Streamers can be effective in any scenario with damn near any fish when properly presented. Presentation, I would say, is the first major hurdle that most people don't understand. If it doesn't look natural, then it doesn't matter who you are or what you're throwing. It's not gonna attract a fish to take it. Yeah. So presentation is key.
So I've never dry flied. Whoa. Well, okay. So all the trout around here they don't take them anyway, because they're pond, raised and released fish that they're not used to,
But your smallies do, right?
Yeah, it's not that effective. Like, I've never had the opportunity. Most of the time it's streamers. Occasionally it's like a popper, So
there's poppers sit right on top.
Yeah,
right?
But it's not the same as lifting that fly off the water, setting it back down, and letting it, like it's skimmering across the top of the water. Yeah. There's none of that. And I've always, I've always wanted to. I've never done it. So, that's one thing.
It's magic.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd like to try and maybe focus on more, even around here, just to try and get the technique down for sure. But
yeah. Well, and out here in Utah, I would tell you, I see the most bug activity and fish sipping on the top in the evenings. So that's when all the osprey have kind of gone home and gone to bed, right? So they don't have to worry as much about predation from above, and they just, you'll see him just start sipping. When a fish starts looking up, he's going to probably look up for a while until something changes that behavior, whether it's the bugs stop hatching or he gets spooked. But it's depending on who you listen to and what you read, it happens only 6% of the time when they feed on the top. So it's when you get a great day dry flying, it's absolutely magical.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
makes me want to do it even more, because I've even been toying with the idea of actually like dry flying for panfish. So, so like taking like a 3 or 4 weight rod or something, and then just like right on the edge of like some reeds on a weed bed or some structure, and just like keep tapping it with a fly or a little spider, come up with something that's like a floating spider,
absolutely,
and just see what that does. I don't know. I've been toying with it.
I'll tell you, a flying ant is something too that you guys have a ton of.
Yeah,
right. That works. I mean, what little fish isn't going to just crush that, right?
And plus, the sunfish fight quite a bit too. So.
Yeah. So when one of them gets it, they're like, "Hey, what did you get?" And you see like 4 or 5 of them chasing him, like, "Hey, man, what the hell?" So that's awesome.
So that's kind of my idea. I haven't actually played around with it yet, but that's like my next venture of trying to fly fish.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I love that.
So if people want to reach out to you, they want to maybe ask you some questions or anything like that, where do they do that, and where do they get a hold of you if they want to actually come out and fish with you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm on Instagram. My business one is Fly Fish With Me Utah, which is a little long, but it's easy to remember. Fly Fish With Me Utah. And then there's, in that bio, you can see my personal page there as well. It's also public. My web page is under construction, but there's a landing page with, I think, prices and my phone number. That's flyfishwithmeutah.com.
Okay.
And so I'm out every month of the year fly fishing, and I love it.
So, I mean, if somebody wants to book, are they able to kind of book that, or do they need to book pretty far out?
In the summer, so we're just winding down for my busiest time of the year, busy season. But now I will tell you, so summer is really busy for me. And I'll do typically 2 trips a day from mid-June, like I was telling you, through August. Now I kind of transition. I, as we discussed, I do a fair bit of hunting as well. So if you're coming out and then hit me up. November is a great time because that's when the brown trout begin to spawn. And I love that they're so aggressive and so, just mad and territorial. And then probably, you didn't ask me this, but I'm going to tell you, my favorite month to fish is probably April. And the reason I love April is because the first big hatches start coming off. So if we get the right conditions, you could have an absolutely epic day dry flying, or an epic day nymphing. The weather in the Rockies here is always changing in the spring. So it could be sunny and 55, or it could be snowing, or it could be, cloudy. It just depends. But I love that time of year because that's when the fish are like, oh, hey, we've got more sun. And they start getting really optimistic and start getting aggressive and warming up to the idea that they need to eat a lot. And so they begin really heavily feeding. And you can see the water literally boiling as bugs begin hatching in the spring.
Nice. That's awesome. So I got to ask you then, what's your favorite species to actually go after then?
On a fly rod?
Yeah.
Ooh, probably steelhead. Steelhead are sea run rainbow trout. They're difficult to fish. And when you get one on, like I told you right before we hopped on, it's not uncommon to have a steelhead take you into backing in 2 or 3 seconds.
So
when you hook them.
When you're doing that, are you still using like a carbon rod, or are you using a glass rod to try and get that extra strength?
No, so I grew up fishing with a glass rod, right? But now the carbon rods are so strong. I don't know that the challenge with the glass rod on a bigger river is that there's so much give, right? They are stronger, but they also flex so much that if you're having to punch through wind and you've got a big, heavy glass rod, dude, you're working 4 times as heavy, as hard as you need to, right? It's just a slog. And then if you do that 3-4 days in a row, right? You're getting beat up. So a 8-9 weight, or like a stout, like a big heavy 7 weight, like switch rod or spay rod for steelhead is super fun, because once they take it, man, it's game on, and it's nuts.
Awesome. No, that's cool. Mike, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge.
It's been awesome, Luke.
And having fun talking. So truly a pleasure. And like I said, so much, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. When you come out to Utah, hit me up.
I will do.
Awesome.
And once again, thank you so much for listening to the Publicly Challenged podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please subscribe on whatever platform it is you're listening to. Also, if you could leave a review, that would help us out. And you can check us out on Instagram or at publiclychallenged.com. And once again, thank you so much for listening to the show.